Back to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Petty School Reading Program. In this lesson, we're going to continue our study of English. English is made up from many different languages. We will never understand English until we know something about those different languages. To understand English well, we must know something about Greek, Latin, Old English, Middle English, French, and German. By learning something of each of these languages, we can understand English. In some places, people use the same language, but they pronounce the words differently. When people with the same language pronounce the words differently, we call these differences dialects. When people with the same language pronounce the words differently, we call these differences dialects. In this picture, we find two men speaking the same language, but using different dialects. The man speaking in the red says the word Caesar. He's speaking in Latin. The man speaking in the blue says Caesar. He's also speaking Latin, but a different dialect. These men are speaking the same language, but different dialects. Make sure you remember the words languages and dialects. Make sure you know the difference between a language and a dialect. English is a language with many different dialects. How should we read written words in English when there are different dialects? How should we read written words in English when there are different dialects? There are 4 steps for reading English words. There are 4 steps for reading English words. The first step in reading English is to think of what spoken word you may be reading. Remember, written words are symbols for spoken words. So use your knowledge of spoken words to help you read. Think of what spoken word you may be reading. If we were to read this sentence on your screen, the red word might be difficult to read. But if we think of what spoken word we may be reading, it's very simple. Our Father, who art in... What's the next word? The word is heaven. If we simply think of what spoken word we may be reading, we'll know that we're reading Our Father, who art in heaven. Let's read another sentence together, thinking of what spoken word we may be reading. Blessed art thou among... What's the next word? If we think of what spoken word we may be reading, we'll guess that it's women. Blessed art thou among women. The second step in reading English words is to read with classical letter sounds. This will help you to read and understand most English words that come from Latin and Greek. Read with classical letter sounds. If we came across this English word in our reading, we could try to read it with classical letter sounds, and that will often help us to know the word we're reading. Catholic. Catholic. We can tell by reading with classical letter sounds that this is the word Catholic. Here's another word that we can try to read with classical letter sounds. Computer. Computer. Now, if you read with classical letter sounds and think of what spoken word you may be reading, it's easy to see that computer is the English word computer. Computer. If thinking of what spoken word we may be reading and reading with classical letter sounds doesn't help us, we can try reading with ecclesiastical or church sounds. Many English words come from church history and are spoken with church pronunciation. We can try reading with ecclesiastical sounds. If we tried to read this word with classical letter sounds, it would sound like this. Pen-keel. Pen-keel. And that wouldn't be very helpful. If we read this word with ecclesiastical sounds, we come a little closer to the English word. Pen-cheel. 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 If we think of what spoken word we may be reading, we can see that this is the English word pencil. Pencil. Let's try reading another English word with ecclesiastical sounds. Refrigerator. 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 Using your knowledge of spoken words, what word do you think this might be? It's the word refrigerator. The fourth step in reading English words is to read with sounds from other languages and dialects our English comes from. Sometimes thinking of spoken words will not help you. Reading with classical sounds will not help you. Reading with ecclesiastical sounds will not help you. You'll need to know the other languages and dialects our English comes from to read some words. In our last lesson, we studied the Old English dialect. We learned that Old English is the dialect of English spoken by King Arthur long ago. We saw that it has different sounds than Latin. In this lesson, we're going to study Middle English. Middle English is the dialect of English spoken by the Normans long ago. It has different sounds than Latin and some different sounds than Old English. "1,000 years after Jesus lived, the Normans conquered England, and their language mixed with English. This dialect is called Middle English. The reason why English is so difficult to read is because this mixing of languages made English very confusing. This mixing of languages made English very confusing. The Normans brought new sounds and spellings into English. The Normans brought new sounds and spellings into English. We're going to study 7 of these sounds. The first sound the Normans brought into English was the final E, or the E at the end of words. We call this sound a schwa in English, and it's pronounced uh. You can see that this Middle English word has a final E, or schwa, at the end. Let's read this word together. Point to the green dot under the letter N, and we'll begin. Nama, nama, nama. Do you hear the final E? Nama. Here we see another Middle English word with a final E. Let's read this word together. Point to the green dot under the letter S, and we'll begin. Spasa, spasa, spasa. Do you hear the final E? Spasa. The second sound in Middle English we need to learn is the long E. This is the same sound as the E in Classical Latin, but in Middle English it was often written with 2 E's. These 2 E's together are read as e, e, e. Here we see a Middle English word with the double E in the middle. This word also has a final E. Let's read this word together. Sueta, sueta, sueta. Do you hear the long E and the final E? Sueta, sueta. Here's a Middle English word with a long E, but it's written with only 1 E. This word also has a final E. Let's read it together. Techa, techa, techa. Do you hear the long E? Techa, techa. The third sound in Middle English we need to learn is called a short E. This sound is not in Classical or Ecclesiastical Latin. The short E in Middle English is pronounced as eh, eh, eh. Here is a Middle English word with a short E. Let's read this word together. Bed, bed, bed. Do you hear the short E? Bed, bed. The next sound in Middle English that we need to learn is the long E, written in Middle English with our letter Y. When we see this letter Y in Middle English, we can read it with the sound E, E. Let's read this Middle English word together. You can see that it has the long E written with the letter Y. It also has the final E sound. Let's read it together. Team, team, team. The next sound in Middle English we need to learn is the short I. This sound is pronounced as I, I. This sound is not in classical or ecclesiastical Latin. It's pronounced I, I. Here is a Middle English word that uses this short I sound. Let's read the word together. This, this, this. Do you hear the short I? This, this. It's different from the Latin E. If we read this word with Latin pronunciation, it would sound like these, these. In Middle English, the pronunciation is this, this. The next sound that we need to learn in Middle English is the double O. This sound is written with two O's. It's pronounced O, O, just like a Latin O, but it's written in Middle English with two O's. Here is a Middle English word that uses the double O. Let's read this word together. God, God, God. Do you hear the double O? God, God. It sounds just like a Latin O, but it's written in Middle English with two O's. Here's another Middle English word with the double O. Let's read it together. Boat, boat, boat. The last sound that we need to learn from Middle English is the double U. It's written as if two letter V's were joined together. In English, we call this the W. It's pronounced with the sound W, W. Here is a Middle English word that uses the W. Let's read the word together. You can see that it has a final E. No, 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 no. Do you hear the W sound? No, no. Here's another Middle English word that uses the W. This word is pretty difficult to read, so follow along carefully. Every letter in the word should be pronounced. Waronga, waronga, waronga. Do you hear the W sound? Waronga, waronga. So in our last lesson, we studied the dialectic known as Old English. This is the dialect of English spoken by King Arthur long ago. It has different sounds than Latin. In this lesson, we've studied Middle English. Middle English is the dialect of English spoken by the Normans long ago. It came into use after Old English. It has different sounds than Latin and Old English, and mixed with Latin and Old English to help form our English today. English is an old language and is always changing and has many different dialects. We have looked at Old and Middle English. Next, we'll study Early Modern English. We hope you've enjoyed this lesson in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's Petty School Reading Program. For more resources from the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, visit us online at classicalliberalarts.com. God bless.